the Welsh and the Irish? Well, I suppose it's a habit to call the family by the name of the elder brother. It's a wrong habit, I agree. When there was the Soviet Union, the members of the family differed from each other much more than they do now, much more than the Scots differ from the English. Yet, here's what I'm driving at. Most of the Western world at that time refers to the Soviet Union as what? As Russia. Well, we didn't mind. If you take the republics of the former Soviet Union, the Armenians in Armenia all spoke Armenian, and most of them spoke Russian, and all Georgians in Georgia spoke Georgian. Whereas if you take Scotland, less than 2% speak Gaelic. And in Wales, only 20% speak Welsh. Those are official figures, mind you. Besides, many of our former republics, like Azerbaijan and the Central Asian republics, differed religiously. They were Muslims, whereas both the Welsh and the Scots are of the same religion. Nonetheless, we were often called Russia. Yes, it's wrong. But, as I said, it did not annoy us. I know what ethnic pride is. I perfectly well know what ethnic discrimination means. If you want to know the truth, my grandfather on my father's side was burnt alive as a result of ethnic strife. You, Mr. Sutherland, write about many Scots who served as admirals and generals in the Tsarist army in Russia, beginning with the 18th century. But you forgot to mention Field Marshal Barclay de Tolly, a Scotsman from a very old Scot family who served in Russia and helped to give Napoleon the beating he deserved. So let's all shake hands and special greetings to the land of Robert Burns and Walter Scott.
Marianne Kehoe of Atlanta, Georgia in the United States writes, and she says, what is Joe's opinion of Boris Yeltsin dismissing the government? Well, Joe, what's your opinion?
Well, it was a complete surprise to all. What I feel is wrong is that no reason was given for this dismissal when the government was officially announced as dismissed. I listened to about a dozen or so commentators, both here and in the West, and there were as many opinions as there were commentators. President Yeltsin has been called an unpredictable politician for more reason than one, and I believe that is correct. He is unpredictable. Now that much of the surprise is over and things are slowly falling into place, I feel the main reason is to get Chairman Mirdin to win the presidential elections, preferably with the support of other parties and factions, in order to count the communist threat. And the second reason for the dismissal of the government was to get the government to show the nation at least some tangible improvements, some tangible results in our economy. But I personally do not believe that this can be done in less than 2 years that are left before the elections. Another reason, because the government was not showing results, the communists wanted to press a vote of no confidence in the government. And President Yeltsin did it first and took the credit for dismissing the government. Another version is that Yeltsin himself wants to run for the third term and wants no competitors. Whether he will or not remains to be seen. Well, we'll both be witness to further developments.
Now, Joe, a letter from Great Britain. It comes from Sean Helm of Middlewich in Cheshire. And Sean asks, how long has Moscow been broadcasting to Europe?
We began in 1929 in German, French, and English. By the beginning of the war, that's in 1941, we broadcast in 21 languages. The peak of our foreign broadcast was when we, not so very long ago, broadcast in over 70 foreign languages. Today, we're down to just over 30. You want my opinion? I firmly believe that 8 languages would be sufficient, but I hope my comparers are not listening to this.
Sean goes on to ask Joe, I'd like to know more about Moscow itself. Now, how much time have you got?
Well, that's a bit of a general question. I'll try to give you some facts. Well, the population is 9 million plus several million visitors. The city was founded 852 years ago. From Moscow, you can go through a system of rivers and canals to the Black and Azov Seas, the Caspian Sea, the Baltic and White Seas. Moscow has a ramified subway system. There are 10 railway stations, and the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is about 9,500 kilometers long, or about 6,000 miles, would take you from Moscow to the Pacific in 6 days. Well, what else? We have 32 theaters, 2 circuses, and 60 museums in Moscow. I'm afraid the theaters are not doing any too well, at least most of them. All major airlines of the world fly to Moscow. And this is very important, I believe, that Moscow played a major role in Russia's history. In 1612, the People's Volunteers, led by Dmitry Pozharsky and Kuzma Minin, whose statue, by the way, stands on Red Square to this day, liberated Moscow from the Polish invaders and their foreign mercenaries. Then, in 1709, the Russian army blocked King Charles XII of Sweden's road to Moscow after defeating his troops at the Battle of Poltava. And Moscow played a vital role in the war against Napoleon in 1812. At the Battle of Borodino, near Moscow, Napoleon's Grande Armée was dealt a blow from which it never recovered. Since then, no invader has set foot in Moscow. So look, we've had the Poles, the Swedes, and Napoleon. Well, Moscow's role was very big in World War II because about 80 German divisions attacked the city, and the enemy threw hundreds of aircraft, thousands of tanks and guns into action. And Hitler declared he would inspect his troops in person at a victory parade in Moscow. 500,000 Muscovites built defense works. The Luftwaffe, his air force, flew 12,000 missions to Moscow without success. And during the whole war, only around 200 aircraft penetrated to the capital. I am witness of that. At the walls of Moscow, the Nazi troops suffered their first major defeat of World War II. It was here that the invincibility of Hitler's army was dispelled. Of course, you realize that in a short answer, I cannot tell you all about the greatest gem of Moscow, the Kremlin. It would take a day to visit all its museums and beautiful cathedrals and palaces. I personally, I don't know why, I remember the diamond exhibit with the famous Orlov diamond, similar to the Koh-i-Noor in the Tower of London. The diamond-studded crowns, the world's finest collection of old English silver, and the collection of carriages, each a work of art. I remember some American tourists asked what these carriages were. And I jokingly said, body by Fisher. Well, they got the joke. Well, if you come to the Kremlin, you may see the throne of Ivan the Terrible and the boots of Peter the Great. They're there for you to see. There's a fine collection of armor, swords, spears, and arms dating from the 13th to the 18th centuries. And those, mind you, my friend, are only a few facts about Moscow.
Joe Sclera in Pennsylvania, right? And here, what is Russia's position vis-a-vis Spain? So when the Trump is
there will be no sanctions if negotiations are broken off between the Serbs and the Albanians. Decisive measures will be taken. They're pretty much all supporting. Stress that on this question Moscow's position coincides with that of the other members of the contact group. Will be enforced against the illegal supply of arms to Kosovo, so that the terrorists could not receive more arms from neighboring countries. The conflicting sides have been given time so that the conflict would not spread. Our policy is to give Kosovo the widest possible autonomy according to international standards.
I want to ask Joe, do the Russian people generally feel sympathetic towards the Serbians?
The Russians have ethnic, linguistic, and historic ties with Serbia. Don't forget that as a result of the Russia-Turkish War in the 70s of the last century, Serbia was freed from the Ottoman yoke.
And Jan Sklav's last question, what is Russia's view of Yugoslavia's territorial integrity and sovereignty?
Putting it in a nutshell, if the Soviet Union broke up into a number of independent nations, so did Yugoslavia. We today have equal relations with all the former states of Yugoslavia and have diplomatic relations with the newly formed countries.
Now we've got a letter from the Reverend Father Valerian Maskarenko of Karnataka in India. And he asks, which is the favorite game of the
Well, it's what's known in Europe as football and soccer in the United States. For volleyball, I must mention. In winter, it's ice hockey. And I must mention skiing, though it's not a game, it's a sport. I mention skiing because so many people go in for it, whole families sometimes. Speaking of games, a very popular table game, especially among the elderly people, is domino. Strange as it may seem.
Father Valerian goes on to ask one or two other questions. What is the density of population per square kilometre in Russia?
Well, my friend, in Karnataka, I'd like to say that a lot of our territory is not for habitation for many reasons, like permafrost, the tundra, or simply very cold weather, lack of roads. Take Canada. Most of the population there is in a belt only about 200 miles north of the United States border. Further north, and I've been there, it's just like Siberia. Yakutia. It's about as big as all of Europe taken together. It's in the permafrost zone, where the soil is frozen. You'll never guess to what depth. The soil is frozen to a depth of 200 meters. And from 6 to 8 months of the year, there are heavy frosts there. The rivers are icebound, and the ice on the rivers in winter is 2 meters thick. Most of the populated area in Siberia is along the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and very little along the rivers. Now, what is the density of our population, you ask? It's 8.6 per square kilometer. The density of the population is 32 times greater.
How many Indians are living in Russia, Joe, do you know?
Yes, not many at all. Very few indeed. I've not heard of any numbers of Indians living here. Of course, there is the embassy, there is the consulate, there are some students, there are businessmen, but you will not find any Indian communities in Moscow. We have a great influx of Chinese, both legal and illegal influx out in the Far East.
And Father Valerian's last question, Joe, how many Catholic priests are there in Russia?
In Russia today, there are 89 Catholic priests, 86 parishes, and a total of about 300,000 Catholic believers. It was different in the Soviet Union because most of the Catholics lived in Lithuania, where they formed a religious majority. They also lived in the western areas of the Ukraine, in Belarus and Latvia. So all these places are not Russia anymore. In the Soviet Union, there were 1,100 Catholic churches. Today, as I've said, all that is outside of Russia.
Now a letter, Joe, from Carl Craig of Shelbyville, Tennessee, United States. I understand 100,000 servicemen are homeless. Where do they sleep, he asks.
One of the biggest problems in the Soviet Union and in Russia today is housing. I know that when our army was recalled from Eastern Germany, the Germans built housing in Russia for the officers and their families that were coming back to Russia. Today we have a government program from this year to the year 2002 to build housing for the servicemen and their families. The program is for 210,000 servicemen. Well, we have something to show. Just this year, 53,000 apartments will be built.
Well, Joe, unfortunately, that's about it. But how about a wrap-up joke?
A famous Russian writer walks...